Somewhere in your house, or maybe in your drawer, or maybe in your parents' pocket right now, there is an iPhone 6s. And I want you to think about something for a second. That phone came out in 2015. That is 11 years ago. 11 years ago, people were still using USB cables that could go in only one way. Netflix had just started making its own shows, and most people thought a $1,000 phone was absolutely insane. And yet, here we are in 2026, and that phone still exists, still turns on, and millions of people around the world are still using it every single day. So the real question is not whether the iPhone 6s is old. We already know it is old. The real question is something that nobody is actually answering honestly. Can you genuinely survive in 2026 with this phone, or are you just lying to yourself? I used the iPhone 6s as my only phone for 30 days. No second device, no backup, no cheating. Just this small metal 11-year-old phone in the real world in 2026. And what I found out completely changed how I think about smartphones. Because the answer is not what you expect. It is not a clean yes, and it is not a clean no. It is something far more interesting than that. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly where this phone stands, who should still be using it, who absolutely should not, and why Apple's decision about this phone back in 2022 was honestly one of the most brutal things a tech company has ever done to its loyal customers. Let's start with what the iPhone 6s actually is, because a lot of people watching this might be younger and genuinely have no idea why this phone has the word legendary attached to it. When Apple released the iPhone 6s in September 2015, it was not just another phone update. This was the phone that introduced 3D Touch, which was a pressure-sensitive display that could tell the difference between a light tap and a deep press, and do different things based on how hard you pushed. No other mainstream phone had this. This was also the phone that brought in Touch ID that was so fast it felt almost instant. The A9 chip, which was so powerful that it was beating Android phones released a full year later in benchmark tests, and a 12-megapixel camera that set a new standard for what a smartphone photo could look like. Technology journalists in 2015 called it the biggest thing to happen to iPhone since the original iPhone. That is not marketing language. That was a genuine technical leap. And then Apple did something that companies almost never do. They kept supporting it. iOS 12, iOS 13, iOS 14, iOS 15. Every single year, Apple kept pushing software updates to this phone long after most Android phones from the same era had been completely abandoned by their manufacturers. A Samsung Galaxy S6, which came out the same year as the iPhone 6s, stopped receiving security updates in 2019. The iPhone 6s was getting updates until 2022, 7 years of software support. That is almost unheard of in this industry. But here is where the story gets complicated. And this is the part that most YouTube videos about this phone completely skip over because it requires them to be honest in a way that is uncomfortable. In 2022, Apple released iOS 16 and the iPhone 6s was not on the list. Done. Finished. The phone that had survived 7 years of updates was officially cut off. And the reason Apple gave was the A9 chip. They said the new features of iOS 16 required more processing power than the A9 could provide. Which sounds reasonable until you actually look at what iOS 16 brought. Lock screen customization, a slightly redesigned notifications panel, some new emoji, and suddenly Apple is telling you that your phone, the one with the chip that was destroying Android competition just a few years earlier, cannot handle new emoji. You can decide for yourself what to think about that. So when I picked up the iPhone 6s in January 2026 and turned it on, it was running iOS 15.8, which is the absolute last version this phone will ever see. And the first thing I noticed, the very first thing within about 30 seconds, is that this phone is fast. Not fast for an old phone. Actually fast. Apps open quickly, scrolling is smooth, the keyboard responds instantly. The A9 chip that Apple put in here in 2015 was so overpowered for what this phone needed to do at the time that even 11 years later it has not been fully pushed to its limits for basic tasks. Sending a message, making a call, opening your photos, checking your email, all of that feels completely normal. This is not a slow, painful experience. I want to be very clear about that because the narrative around old phones is always that they are slow and terrible, and you should throw them away, and that is simply not true for the iPhone 6s in 2026. The camera is where things get genuinely interesting. The iPhone 6s has a 12-megapixel rear camera, and in 2015 that was class-leading. In 2026, your iPhone 16 has a 48-megapixel main sensor with computational photography that uses machine learning to process every single photo before you even see it. The gap between those two cameras is enormous. But here's the thing that surprised me. In good lighting, in daylight, outdoors, or near a window, the iPhone 6s still takes photos that you would be happy to post. They are sharp, the colors are accurate, there is real detail in the image. You are not going to be embarrassed by these photos. Where it completely falls apart is low light. Anything after sunset, any indoor restaurant, any concert, any situation where the lighting is less than perfect. The iPhone 6's camera produces photos that look like they were taken through a foggy window. Grainy, soft, washed out. The difference between this camera and a modern phone in low light is not small. It is the difference between a professional photograph and something that looks like it came from a 2009 flip phone. If photography matters to you, if you document your life through your camera, this phone will frustrate you deeply. Video is a similar story. The iPhone 6's shoots 4K video, which is remarkable for an 11-year-old phone. The footage in daylight is actually quite good, stable, detailed, genuinely usable. But again, low light kills it, and there is no cinematic mode, no action mode, no ProRes, none of the computational video features that have become standard on modern iPhones. For basic daytime video, fine. For anything serious or in challenging lighting, not fine. Now let us talk about the thing that actually determines whether this phone is usable in 2026. It has nothing to do with the camera or the speed or the screen. It is the software situation. The iPhone 6 is stuck on iOS 15, and iOS 15 came out in 2021. That is 5 years ago. And the problem with being on iOS 15 in 2026 is not that things look different or that you're missing some features. The problem is that apps are starting to drop support for it. Not all apps, not even most apps yet, but enough apps that you will feel it. I opened the App Store on the iPhone 6's and tried to download 10 of the most popular apps that people use every day in 2026. 7 of them installed perfectly and worked fine. 2 of them installed, but showed me a warning that they were not optimized for my version of iOS, and some features might not work correctly. And one of them, a banking app that a lot of people use for digital payments, straight up refused to install. Not because of the phone hardware, because of the iOS version. That is the beginning of a problem that is only going to get worse every single year from here. Security is the other thing you need to understand clearly. Apple is no longer releasing security patches for iOS 15. That means if someone discovers a vulnerability in the software on this phone, and security researchers find new iPhone vulnerabilities every single year, Apple is not going to fix it for the iPhone 6's. Your phone, your photos, your banking apps, your messages, all of it is sitting on software that is no longer being actively protected. Now, the risk of this in everyday life is not zero, but it is also not as terrifying as it might sound if you are careful about what you click and what networks you connect to. But it is a real consideration that you should not ignore. The battery situation is where most iPhone 6's phones are going to disappoint you most in 2026, and this is not really Apple's fault. Lithium batteries degrade over time. Every charge cycle makes them slightly less capable than they were before. An iPhone 6's that has been used for several years will have a battery that is probably somewhere between 60 and 70% of its original capacity, which means on original hardware, you are looking at maybe 4 to 5 hours of screen on time on a good day. That is not enough for a full day in 2026, where your phone is your map, your wallet, your communication device, and your entertainment. If you are buying a used iPhone 6's in 2026, the first thing you need to do before anything else is get the battery replaced. A new battery from Apple or a reputable repair shop will cost you somewhere between $50 and $80 depending on where you live, and it will make this phone feel like a completely different device. Without a new battery, the experience is going to be painful. With a new battery, this phone has a genuine second life. Let me tell you what the 30 days actually felt like in practice. The first week, I was surprised by how capable it was. Everything worked. I was making calls, sending messages, watching YouTube, browsing the web, and it was all fine. Week 2 is when I started noticing the cracks. I was at a dinner with friends and tried to take a photo in the restaurant, and the image came back looking terrible. I tried to use an app I needed for work and got the compatibility warning. Small things, but they added up. Week 3, I started genuinely missing features I had taken for granted. The ability to scan documents directly from the camera app the way modern iPhones do. The smoother Face ID experience versus the home button. The weight and the size. Actually, the iPhone 6's feels tiny in 2026 compared to what we are all used to. And some people will love that, and some people will find it disorienting. Week 4, I had made my peace with it for what it is and accepted its limitations. But I also knew that I would not choose to use this as my primary phone if I had a choice. So here is the honest verdict that you came here for. The iPhone 6's in 2026 is not unusable, but it is on the edge. If you are someone who uses their phone primarily for calls, messages, WhatsApp, some light social media browsing, and occasional photos in good lighting, this phone can still serve you, especially if you replace the battery. If you are a student or someone in a tight financial situation, and this phone is what you have access to right now, you are not suffering. You have a functional device. If you are traveling and need a temporary backup phone, this is perfectly adequate. But if you rely on your phone for work, if mobile banking and payment apps are essential to your daily life, if photography matters to you, if you need your device to be secure, or if you plan to use this phone for more than another year, then honestly, it is time to move on. Not because the iPhone 6s became a bad phone. It did not. It is still the same remarkable device it was when it launched, but the world around it moved and it stayed still. And in technology, standing still is the same as moving backwards. The real lesson of the iPhone 6s in 2026 is not about this specific phone. It is about what Apple proved was possible. A company that actually committed to supporting its hardware gave people a device that lasted 11 years and still functions today. That is the standard every smartphone company should be held to, and almost none of them are. So if you have an iPhone 6s sitting in a drawer, charge it up, give it a new battery, appreciate what it represents, and then make an honest decision about whether it fits your life in 2026, because it might. And if it does not, at least now you know exactly why. If this video helped you make a decision about your phone, drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you are curious about which budget phones in 2026 actually give you the best value without spending a fortune, that video is coming next week. Subscribe so you do not miss it.